We can't come. Mom's fine. My wife is throwing our 10th wedding anniversary party, and we can't just abandon our guests. Those were the exact words Jonathan said to the doctor when he was told I was dying. Literally, dying. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of From. I want to know how far it's traveled. Because this story is going to leave you speechless. My heart had failed 3 times in the ambulance, and my 42-year-old son chose Vanessa's cocktails and oceanfront decorations over his mother's life. I lay here hooked up to machines that keep my heart beating, staring at the ceiling of this cold hospital room that smells of iodine and salt, carried in through a slightly open window. The cries of seagulls drift faintly from the shore 2 blocks away. It's 2 in the morning, and I'm completely alone. The heart monitor beeps erratically, reminding me that each beat could be my last. And my sons are 30 meters away at the Coastal Hotel ballroom, toasting with champagne beneath chandeliers. The smell of disinfectant mixes with the metallic taste in my mouth since I woke from emergency surgery. My hands tremble every time I try to move them. And it's not just the medication, it's the rage coursing through my veins like pure venom. Mrs. Graves, please try to rest whispers. Grace Miller, the night shift nurse. She is a young woman, perhaps the age of my daughters-in-law, but her eyes hold a compassion I haven't seen in my own family for years. The doctor said, "The most important thing now is for you to stay calm." Calm. How can I be calm when I've just discovered that to my children, I am less important than a party? Dr. Miller was very specific when he told me about the calls 2 hours ago. His words still echo in my head like hammer blows. I told them explicitly that this could be her last night, that the heart attack was massive, and that we needed them to come immediately. David's response was even worse than his brother's. "Doctor, she can't wait until tomorrow. Claudia organized everything weeks in advance, and all the guests have already arrived. My mom is strong. She's always recovered from everything. I've always recovered from everything." That phrase reverberates in my head like a painful echo. I recovered when their father abandoned us 25 years ago, leaving me with 2 teenagers and mountains of debt. I recovered when I had to work 3 jobs to put them through private college cleaning offices at dawn, waiting tables at a diner during the day, and sewing clothes late into the night. My fingers still bear the scars from the sewing machine. I recovered when I sold my house, that little green house, with the garden where they grew up, to help Jonathan with the down payment for his own. "It's only temporary, Mom," he had told me. "I'll pay you back in 2 years." That was 8 years ago. I recovered when I lent my life savings, $28,000 that I had saved penny by penny for decades, to David's business that never took off. "It's a safe investment, Mom. In 6 months, I'll pay you back everything with interest." The business folded after 3 months. I recovered when Vanessa told me in front of the whole family at last Christmas dinner that my sea green dress wasn't appropriate for the occasion and that I should dress more my age. I recovered when Claudia decided my Sunday dinners were too much work and that it was better to order takeout. I recovered when they gradually stopped inviting me to family gatherings, because you know how Grandma is always wanting to give her opinion on everything. But this is different. This time it's not about lost money or ignored slights. This time it's about something I can't recover. The knowledge that when it truly mattered, when my life hung by a thread, they chose to stay at a party. Dr. Miller had explained to me in a grave voice, "Mrs. Graves, you had 3 cardiac arrests during transport. The paramedics managed to resuscitate you, but you were technically dead for 4 minutes. It's a miracle you're here talking to me. 4 minutes dead, and my children were worried about not ruining Vanessa's seashell pink party decorations. The door to my room remains closed. No worried calls in these 5 hours since I woke up. No text messages, just the constant sound of the machines keeping me alive and the echo of their words. We can't. My wife is throwing a party. Grace checks my vital signs every hour. Your blood pressure is a little high," she says with genuine concern. "Are you thinking about something that's making you nervous? If she only knew I was thinking about 66 years of unconditional love thrown away for champagne glasses and seaside balloons. At this moment, as I look at the distant reflection of moonlight on the water through the hospital window, something inside me is breaking definitively. And it's not my heart, it's something much deeper. It's the last drop of hope I had that maybe, just maybe, I still mattered to someone in this world. Tomorrow they'll call. I'm sure they'll show up with cheap supermarket flowers and well-rehearsed excuses. They'll say they didn't understand the gravity that they thought it was. Another one of my exaggerations, like when I fell and fractured my wrist last year and it took them 3 days to come see me. But it's too late. Tonight they've shown me exactly where I stand on their priority list, and that place is very, very low. I close my eyes and transport myself back 40 years. Jonathan was 2 years old and David had just been born. We lived in that small 2-bedroom house in the lakeside neighborhood with walls so thin I could hear the neighbors breathe. Robert, my husband, then worked at the textile factory, and I stayed home taking care of the children. I remember perfectly the smell of baby powder and the sound of their giggles when I bathed them in that secondhand plastic tub we bought. Jonathan was always the clingiest with me. "Mommy, Mommy," he would repeat all day, following me around the house on his chubby little legs. David was more independent, but when he got sick, he became my shadow, asking me to sing that lullaby I had learned from my mother. Everything for my children, I told myself as I sewed clothes until 3 in the morning to sell at the weekend market. Every extra dollar went directly to their needs: new shoes, when they grew school supplies, Jonathan's soccer classes, David's guitar lessons. I wore the same gray dress for 2 years straight, but they were always impeccable. The first sign that something was changing came when Jonathan turned 25. He had met Vanessa at his job, a calculating woman with a perfect smile and always immaculate nails. The first time he brought her to dinner, she examined my house as if she were evaluating a dilapidated property. "Eleanor," she said to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "don't you think it would be better if Jonathan and I spent Christmas at my place this year?" My family has deeply rooted traditions, and my mother is used to doing things a certain way. That Christmas, I ate alone for the first time in 25 years. The turkey I had bought remained untouched in the refrigerator for a week. When I asked Jonathan how dinner had been, he replied, "It was amazing, Mom. Vanessa's house is spectacular. It has a dining room that looks like it's straight out of a magazine, and the food, well, her mom is a really good cook," as if my 30 years of cooking for him had meant nothing. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only proof I was still here. Each erratic note stabbed the silence of the hospital room, a silence broken only by the faint cries of seagulls drifting through the cracked window from the shore. Salt and iodine mixed in the air, reminding me that life can be sharp and stinging even when you are barely clinging to it. Just hours before my heart had stopped 3 times in the ambulance. 3 times I was pulled back from the black abyss. And while strangers fought desperately to keep me alive, my sons, my own flesh and blood, were laughing at Vanessa's anniversary party, raising glasses of champagne under golden chandeliers by the sea. When Dr. Miller called them, his voice stern. With urgency, Jonathan's reply was ice. "We can't come. My wife is throwing our 10th anniversary party. We can't just abandon our guests." I had thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I had survived abandonment 25 years ago when their father walked away. I had survived 3 jobs, endless nights, and the humiliation of begging landlords for 1 more week's grace. I had endured their casual slights at Christmas dinners and the way their wives rolled their eyes when I spoke. But this, to be told in the moment of my possible death that appetizers and social chatter were more important than me. This cut deeper than any scalpel the surgeons used to save my life. And David's answer was even worse. "Doctor, can it wait until tomorrow? Claudia organized everything. Mom is strong, she always recovers. Strong, always recovers." Words that once sounded like praise now felt like shackles. because strength for them meant I didn't matter. It meant I could be taken for granted, postponed, placed on a shelf until convenient. I lay staring at the white ceiling, the fluorescent lights humming. My throat was raw, my chest burning from the defibrillator shocks. My body was a battlefield, but the real war was inside my soul. Anger surged like a storm tide, flooding every vein, every fragile beat that still kept me alive. Nurse Grace leaned over me, her young face lit by a gentleness I hadn't seen in years from my own family. "Mrs. Graves, please try to rest," she whispered. Her voice was warm, but rest was impossible. How can you rest when your entire worth has just been measured and found less than a ballroom full of strangers? I closed my eyes, and the reel of memory spun mercilessly. Jonathan, at 2, tugging on my dress with chubby hands saying, "Mommy," 100 times a day. David, sick with fever, begging me to sing the lullaby my mother had taught me. The countless nights I sat by their beds sewing until my fingers bled so they could wear decent clothes to school. I had eaten stale bread so they could have fresh fruit. I had sold my green house, the one with the little garden where their heights were marked on the doorframe, so Jonathan could have a better start in life. He promised he'd pay me back in 2 years. It's been 8. And when David's business collapsed, I handed over my life savings, $28,000 scraped together penny by penny, decade after decade. He swore it was safe, swore I'd be repaid with interest. Within 3 months, the business was gone, and with it, my last hope for financial dignity. But this betrayal tonight was greater than money, greater than lost houses, greater even than humiliation at Christmas dinners, where Vanessa sneered at my dress or Claudia dismissed my lasagna as too heavy. Tonight was the betrayal of my very life. I wanted to scream, but my voice was just a whisper. Instead, tears slid silently into my hairline. 5 hours had passed since the surgery. No phone call, no text message. Nothing but silence the machines and the echo of their excuses. I shifted slightly, and that's when I noticed something strange. Inside the nightstand drawer, beneath the hospital-issued tissues and a plastic water cup, was a small envelope. It was sealed, its edges worn. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The name on the front wasn't mine. It belonged to a former patient, long discharged. I shouldn't have opened it. But curiosity and pain blurred the lines of propriety. I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky, but the words cut into me like a mirror, held up to my soul. If you are reading this and you are lying here alone, then perhaps your children are not beside you either. Remember this: you are more than their absence. You are more than their neglect. Do not let your last thoughts be bitterness. Let them be freedom. I stared at the words, my breath catching. It was as if some ghost of another abandoned mother had left me a message from beyond the veil of her own suffering. And suddenly I felt both less alone and more enraged, because freedom. What did freedom mean to a woman tethered to a bed by wires, whose very heart had betrayed her body? What did freedom mean when the people you bled for toasted in gowns and tuxedos, pretending you were strong enough to endure one more night? The humiliation was unbearable. I felt erased, like my decades of sacrifice had been written in chalk and the tide of their indifference had washed it clean. Fan Yuat surged in me with such ferocity I feared it would burst my chest open more than any heart attack. Grace came in again, checking the monitors. "Your blood pressure's climbing, Mrs. Graves. Are you upset about something?" Something 66 years of giving everything only to discover I was worth less than a cake and a string quartet. My voice was hoarse, but I managed to whisper, "Everything." Outside, waves crashed against the seawall. Inside the storm, inside me, built higher. Tomorrow they will come. They will bring flowers from the supermarket and excuses rehearsed to perfection. They will say they didn't understand. They will insist they thought I exaggerated, just like when I fractured my wrist last year and waited 3 days before anyone bothered to check. But tomorrow will be too late. Because tonight I finally see my place on their list of priorities, and it is very, very low. I looked again at the mysterious letter, its words burning into me. Do not let your last thoughts be bitterness. Let them be freedom. Was freedom possible? Was there a life still waiting for me? Beyond this room, beyond this city, beyond the shadow of children who saw me as nothing but an obligation. The heart monitor beeped steadily, counting down my moments. And in the rhythm of those beeps, a thought began to grow. Not yet fully formed, not yet plan or action, but a spark of rebellion, a spark of escape, and maybe a spark of freedom. If you were Eleanor in this moment, abandoned by your sons for a party yet offered a strange letter that whispers of freedom, what would you choose? Press 0 if you believe she should forgive and wait for her children. Press 1 if you believe she should seize the spark of freedom and walk away forever. The night stretched long and merciless, and I lay there with the mysterious letter still pressed to my chest. Its words whispered through my veins like fire. Do not let your last thoughts be bitterness. Let them be freedom. At first I fought against the idea. Freedom from my children. From the very people I had built my life around, it felt unthinkable, almost monstrous. But as the hours passed, something inside me cracked open. For the first time in decades, I saw the truth with clarity sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. I had given everything: my body, my youth, my health, my dignity, my money, my house piece by piece. I had bled myself dry for Jonathan and David, and in return, they had given me excuses, silence, and abandonment. A thunderclap of awareness roared in my soul. I was not their mother anymore. I was their servant, and I refused to serve one more day. It was as if the fluorescent lights above flickered with my fury. My heart pounded, not with weakness, but with rage, a new rhythm that drowned out the beep of the monitor. I was awake, violently awake. Grace Miller entered quietly to check my vitals. She glanced at me, then at the envelope in my hand. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. I looked her straight in the eyes, and for once my voice did not tremble. No, I was too busy waking up. She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" I opened the letter and showed it to her. She read it silently, her brow tightening. When she finished, she sat down beside me, her hands folded in her lap. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. "My mother died in a hospital room much like this one, alone. My brother didn't show up until 2 days later. He said he was too busy with work. The words hit me harder than the defibrillator had. And you? Where were you? I was here. I was holding her hand. I was a nursing student then." Her voice cracked. "But I always wondered if she felt abandoned. I found her journal after she passed. She wrote about being invisible in her children's lives, invisible even to the ones she loved most." Grace pulled a small notebook from her pocket. She carried it like a relic. I copied one page. I keep it with me to remind myself why I became a nurse. She handed me a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was faded, but the words sliced through the night. If I mattered, they would come. If I mattered, I wouldn't be alone on my last night. But perhaps the truth is simpler. Perhaps I was only useful, not loved. Tears blurred my vision. This wasn't just my story. It was the story of countless mothers erased by the very children they raised. The explosion inside me became unstoppable. "Grace," I said, my voice steady and cold, "I will not let my life end like hers. I will not let my obituary read. She gave everything and was forgotten anyway." Grace touched my arm. "Then don't. You're still here. You have a choice. A choice." The word thundered in my chest. For 66 years, I had lived as if choice belonged only to my children. But tonight, lying in this sterile bed, I made the first real choice of my adult life. "I'm leaving," I declared. "Not tomorrow, not next week. I am leaving their lives. Forever." The words were a verdict as final as any gavel striking wood in a courtroom. The trial of Jonathan and David was over. The sentence was exile from me. Grace didn't flinch. She simply nodded. Then we'll find a way. Her calmness startled me. You don't think I'm crazy? She shook her head. No, I think you're finally sane. For the next hour, we whispered like conspirators in the dim glow of the monitors. Grace outlined how I could leave without signing official discharge papers, how Martha Johnson, my loyal neighbor and only true friend, could help me settle matters outside. Every detail, every option sharpened the blade of my resolve. The more we spoke, the lighter I felt. A weight I had carried on my back for 4 decades began to slide off. For the first time, I could breathe without choking on regret. I imagined Jonathan's face when he realized his mother had vanished. I pictured David's panic as he read a letter that told him in black and white that he no longer owned my loyalty. I imagined Vanessa and Claudia scrambling to explain to their friends how their sick, inconvenient mother-in-law had simply disappeared. The humiliation they had handed me, I was about to hand it back triple-fold. But make no mistake, this wasn't revenge. This was release, a breaking of chains, a storm tearing down a rotten house so that something new could grow in the clearing. I sat upright, ignoring the ache in my chest. My body was frail, but my will had become iron. Grace, I said, get me a pen and paper. Tonight I write my last words as their mother. She returned with a clipboard, and I began. My hand shook, but the words poured out like lava. I wrote of sacrifices of nights without sleep, of houses sold, and dreams buried. I wrote of the olive dress Vanessa mocked, of the lasagna Claudia dismissed, of the decades of invisibility. And then I wrote the verdict. When you read this, I will no longer be yours. I will no longer beg for crumbs of love. You chose parties over my pulse. You chose silence over my suffering. Now I choose myself. Goodbye. By the time I finished, my cheeks were soaked with tears. But they were not tears of grief. They were tears of deliverance. I folded the letter, placed it on the nightstand, and pressed my palm over it like a signature carved in flesh. This was my emancipation proclamation. The room was silent save for the monitor's rhythm. Even the seagulls outside seemed to pause. Grace whispered, "How do you feel?" I smiled through the tears, like a prisoner who just heard the cell door swing open. She nodded. "Then go, Mrs. Graves. Walk through it." And for the first time since the heart attack, I slept not the sleep of despair, but the sleep of someone who had finally made a decision. Dear listener, if this moment of Eleanor's fierce awakening stirred something in you, if you believe every mother deserves dignity, not excuses, tap the like button now. It tells me you want more stories that matter. The decision had been made. The letter was written, the verdict sealed, but words on paper were not enough. Now came the test of steel, the moment when conviction had to become action. When dawn broke, the sky over the coast was heavy and gray. Dark clouds rolled in from the ocean, low and threatening, like a mirror of the storm that had taken root in my chest. I felt the electricity in the air, the sharpness before lightning splits the heavens. Grace came in quietly at shift change. She checked my vitals, but her eyes spoke a different language. "It's today, isn't it?" she asked softly. I nodded. My throat was dry, but my will was iron. "Yes. Today I leave." The words steadied me. They were no longer a fantasy scribbled in ink at 2 a.m. They were a plan, and I was going to live it. She handed me a small folded note. "I spoke to Martha. She'll come by this afternoon just as visiting hours are closing. She'll bring a bag with your clothes and what you asked for." My pulse quickened. This was it. Every detail mattered. A single mistake, a single hesitation, and the life I had claimed for myself could crumble before it began. Hours crawled by like slow drops of rain sliding down glass. Nurses bustled in and out, doctors murmured in hallways, but I felt as if the world had narrowed to a single tightrope stretched across an abyss. My mind replayed every step of the plan until it was etched into me like scripture. At noon, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was moving in. The windows rattled faintly, and I almost laughed at the poetry of it. Nature itself seemed to rise and bear witness to my rebellion. When the clock hands crept toward 4, my body tensed like a drawn bow. I pressed the call button, and Grace appeared calm as ever. "Are you ready?" she whispered. "I was born ready for this," I replied, and I meant it. Every humiliation, every betrayal, every lonely Christmas dinner had led to this razor's edge of freedom. At exactly 4:30, Martha Johnson entered the room. She was carrying a small suitcase, her face composed, but her eyes fierce with loyalty. "You look pale," she said, leaning close, "but I know that's not weakness. It's anticipation." I almost smiled. "Do you have it?" She nodded and slid the bag under the bed. "Clothes, shoes, the envelope of cash you gave me, and the papers Grace's sister prepared." The air crackled with tension as the three of us, Martha, Grace, and I, stood together like a secret covenant. Outside, the rain had begun tapping against the window like impatient fingers. The plan was simple, but execution would demand precision. I would change into my clothes. Grace would distract the nurse on duty at the station with paperwork. Martha would walk with me as if I were a visiting relative, guiding me out before anyone questioned us. Simple, but my heart pounded like a war drum. Every beat carried the risk of discovery. I slid off the bed slowly, my legs trembling at first, but my determination steadied them. I pulled on the dark green dress Martha had chosen for me. Vanessa once told me that color didn't suit me. Tonight it was the color of defiance. When I slipped my feet into my shoes, I felt taller, stronger. Not a patient, not a victim. A woman reclaiming her life. Martha steadied my arm as we moved toward the door. "Deep breaths," she whispered. The hallway stretched before us like a gauntlet. Fluorescent lights hummed, carts rattled, voices echoed from around corners. Every sound felt magnified, every second a hammer blow on my nerves. We passed the nurse's station. Grace was there, leaning over a chart, asking questions in a voice so calm it almost disguised her role in our conspiracy. The nurse on duty barely looked up. Step by step, we moved down the corridor. My pulse roared in my ears, a drumbeat of suspense. Would someone stop us? Would someone call out? No one did. We turned the corner, and the exit sign glowed red ahead of us like a beacon. My breath caught. Freedom was less than 50 feet away. And then thunder cracked so loud it shook the building. For a moment, the power flickered. The hallway lights dimmed, and in the semi-darkness, I froze. "Keep walking." Martha urged, her grip tightening. "Don't stop now." I forced my feet forward one step, then another. The rain lashed against the glass doors ahead, wild and furious. But to me, it was the applause of heaven, the roar of the universe bearing witness as I crossed the threshold of my old life. We pushed through the doors and into the storm. Rain drenched my dress, within seconds plastered my hair to my face, but I didn't care. The wind whipped around me cold and fierce, but it felt like baptism. I was outside. I was free. Martha hustled me into her car, slamming the door against the gale. We sat there, breathing hard water dripping onto the seats, and for a moment none of us spoke. Then I laughed. It wasn't bitter, it wasn't broken, it was wild and alive. "We did it," I said. "We really did it." Martha grinned through the rain-streaked windshield. "And this is just the beginning." As she started the engine, lightning split the sky, and I thought of the words I had written in my letter. Goodbye. Tonight, those goodbyes had become real. Inside the hospital, my bed was already cooling the letter, waiting like a loaded gun. Soon my children would read it and the verdict would fall, but I wouldn't be there to see it. The storm carried us forward, the windshield wipers straining against the torrent, and I felt a sense of exhilaration I hadn't known in decades. Fear and determination twined together in my chest, tight as a bowstring, propelling me into a future I had chosen for myself. Whatever waited in Charleston, in Irene's home, and a new life I had yet to build, it was mine. Mine alone. And nothing, not Jonathan, not David, not their wives, Not society's expectations would take it from me again. Dear listener, let me ask you honestly, was this voice, this narration of Eleanor's stormy escape, truly captivating for you? Press 0 if it didn't feel engaging. Press 1 if it pulled you in and kept you listening until the very end. Rain streaked across the windows as Martha's car pulled away from the hospital, its tires hissing against flooded streets. Each drop was a drumbeat against the glass, a rhythm that seemed to match the wild pounding in my chest. I pressed my palm flat against the window, feeling the cold seep through, and whispered to myself, "It's done. I'm out." For decades I had dreamed of freedom in moments I barely admitted to myself, when Vanessa's sharp words cut too deep, when David's dismissive tone left me feeling like a ghost in my own family. But those were fantasies, small sparks snuffed out by duty and guilt. Tonight, in the midst of thunder and lightning, those sparks had ignited into a fire. My body trembled not just from the storm's chill, but from the enormity of what I had done. I had walked away from my sons. I had left the life I had built around them like walls of a prison. The sensation was terrifying and intoxicating all at once. Martha kept her hand steady on the wheel, her eyes sharp on the road. "You did it, Eleanor," she said softly. "I've never seen anyone so brave." Brave. The word felt foreign on my skin like a borrowed coat, but the warmth of it seeped in. Brave. Not abandoned, not forgotten, not pitiful. Brave. We reached the bus station as night deepened. The storm had begun to break, but rain still trickled in thin sheets from the roof. I clutched my small suitcase, the weight of $8,000 tucked carefully inside, and followed Martha through the dim terminal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across cracked linoleum. A handful of travelers sat hunched on benches, their faces weary, their eyes glazed from journeys too long. And yet to me, this place felt like a palace, because it was the threshold of a new existence. Martha hugged me tight before I boarded. Her embrace was strong, but her voice trembled. "Call me when you arrive. Don't forget you're not alone, Eleanor. You have me always." I know I whispered, clinging to her as though I were saying goodbye to the last remnants of my old life. Perhaps I was. When I stepped onto the bus, the air was thick with the smell of damp coats and stale coffee. I found a seat by the window, pressed my suitcase close, and let the exhaustion of the past 48 hours wash over me. As the engine roared and the bus lurched forward, I felt a shiver race down my spine. This was it. No turning back. The rain outside blurred the neon signs of the city as we left. I watched them fade one by one until only darkness and the occasional flash of headlights remained. And in that darkness, a strange calmness settled in me. For the first time in my adult life, I belonged to no one but myself. I closed my eyes, letting the steady hum of the bus soothe me when a gentle voice interrupted. "Excuse me," it said. I turned and saw an elderly woman in the seat across the aisle, her silver hair tied in a bun, her hands folded neatly over a leather-bound book. "You look as though you've just run away from something." Her words startled me, but her smile was kind. "I have," I admitted, my voice low. She nodded knowingly. So did I once. Her name was Mrs. Caldwell, a retired history teacher from North Carolina. She was traveling to visit her niece in Texas, she said, but the way her eyes lingered on me made me feel she carried a heavier story. "What did you run from?" I asked, curiosity overcoming my fatigue. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "3 sons who thought my worth ended when I retired. They wanted me in a nursing home. They told me it was for my safety, but I knew it was for their convenience. So one night I packed a bag and never looked back." Her words echoed through me like a bell struck in a silent church. Here beside me was living proof I was not insane, that others had walked this path of severing ties and survived. "What happened to you after I asked my heart in my throat?" She smiled faintly. "I started teaching again. Not for money, volunteering at a community center. I found friends who valued me not for what I gave them, but for who I was. It wasn't easy, Eleanor, but it was right. Sometimes freedom isn't about comfort, it's about dignity. Her story wrapped around me like a blanket. Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition, of kinship. For years I had felt like a solitary prisoner of my children's expectations. Now, on a bus, barreling through the storm-soaked night, I realized I was part of something larger, a quiet, invisible sisterhood of women who had chosen themselves at last. The bus rolled on hour after hour. Some passengers slept, some whispered into phones. But I sat wide awake listening to the rhythm of the wheels and the rhythm of my own heart, steadier now than it had been in years. By dawn, the storm had passed. Pale sunlight spilled across the horizon, painting the fields gold as the bus entered South Carolina. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and breathed deeply. This was my rebirth. Every mile carried me farther from humiliation, closer to dignity. I was no longer the woman waiting by a silent phone, hoping for children who had long since stopped caring. I was Eleanor Graves, whole, unshackled, alive. And as the bus neared Charleston, I whispered a prayer not of desperation, but of gratitude. Gratitude for Grace, for Martha, for Mrs. Caldwell, for every hand that had nudged me toward the door of my cage. Gratitude that I had found the strength to walk through it. My soul trembled with release. My body was still frail, but my spirit soared. I was free, gloriously free, like a bird that had battered its wings against bars for years, only to find the sky waiting. I did not know what awaited me at Irene Whitfield's house. I did not know if I would find work friends or love. But I knew this, whatever came next would be mine. Mine to choose, mine to embrace, mine to live. As the bus slowed into the Charleston terminal, I wiped my eyes and smiled. Behind me lay chains. Ahead of me lay sky. And for the first time since the night of my heart attack, I whispered to myself with trembling certainty, I am free. When the bus rolled into Charleston that morning, the storm had already broken. The air smelled fresh, the streets shimmered from the night's rain, and the city greeted me with light spilling across red brick buildings and magnolia trees in bloom. I stepped off the bus with my suitcase clutched tight, and for the first time in decades, I felt the ground beneath my feet was not a weight pressing me down, but a promise lifting me up. Irene Whitfield stood waiting near the terminal doors, her tall frame unmistakable, her silver-streaked hair glowing in the sunlight. The moment she saw me, her face broke into a smile, wide and warm. She ran forward and wrapped me in her arms. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you look like a bird that's flown through fire." I clung to her tears, streaming freely. That's exactly what I feel like. Her home sat on a quiet street, shaded by oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. The white house, with its wide porch and rocking chairs, seemed to breathe serenity. Irene carried my bag inside and showed me a guest room overlooking her garden. Roses climbed the fence, and a lemon tree leaned toward the window, heavy with fruit. "This is yours now," Irene said, patting my hand. "Stay as long as you want. No expectations, no judgments, just peace." That word peace echoed through me like a bell. I had lived in chaos for so long, chaos of guilt, chaos of duty, chaos of endless disappointment. To hear the promise of peace felt like hearing a new language. The first night, Irene cooked shrimp and grits, her specialty. We sat at her kitchen table, candles flickering, and she listened quietly as I recounted everything: the party, the abandonment, the storm, the letter I had left behind. She never interrupted, never doubted. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You've been reborn, cousin, and now you get to choose how to live." Her words were a balm, but they were also a challenge. Because what did I want now? For decades, every decision had been about Jonathan or David, their houses, their bills, their needs. I had no practice choosing for myself. The days unfolded slowly at first. I woke early, walked with Irene through her garden, breathed in the scent of jasmine and let the sun warm my face. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking to chest pains or the gnawing ache of loneliness. But peace alone was not enough. Something in me, something long buried, stirred restlessly. I didn't want only to survive, I wanted to live. That's when Irene told me about the choir. There's a little group at the community center, she explained. Mostly seniors, some younger folks too. They meet twice a week. They sing everything from hymns to folk songs. I think you'd like it. I almost laughed. I haven't sung in 40 years. Then it's time to start again, she said simply. The following Tuesday, I walked into the community center with trembling hands. A circle of chairs filled the room, and a woman at the piano waved me over with a smile. "Welcome, I'm Margaret. Come sit, don't worry, we'll warm up together." The group began with a simple hymn. I opened my mouth hesitantly, my voice raspy from disuse. But as the notes rose around me, something miraculous happened. My chest loosened, my voice steadied, and for the first time since childhood, I felt music bloom inside me. It was as if every unspoken word, every stifled cry, every silent prayer of the past 4 decades found its way into that song. My voice cracked once, then grew stronger, soaring with the others. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I didn't stop. I was not just singing, I was breathing, I was healing, I was rising. When the hymn ended, Margaret clapped her hands. "Beautiful Eleanor, your voice carries such warmth. We're glad you're here." I pressed my hand to my heart, overwhelmed. For years, I had been invisible at family dinners, a nuisance at parties. Here among strangers, I was seen, valued, cherished. Walking home that evening, I felt lighter than air. The city glowed under the setting sun, and I realized I was smiling, not the practiced smile of politeness, but a genuine, radiant smile. Hope, once a faint ember, now roared like a fire inside me. Every rehearsal brought more joy. We sang folk ballads, spirituals, even a playful rendition of "This Land Is Your Land." Each song was a thread weaving me back into the fabric of life. The choir wasn't just about music, it was about community, about belonging. For the first time in years, I belonged. One afternoon, Irene found me humming as I pruned her roses. "You look 10 years younger," she teased. "I feel it," I replied. And it was true. The mirror no longer reflected a woman crushed by disappointment, but one reborn. My wrinkles hadn't vanished, my hair hadn't darkened, but my spirit had lit up and it shone through every line on my face. In quiet moments, I still thought of Jonathan and David. I imagined them reading my letter, their excuses crumbling, their guilt rising like smoke. But those thoughts no longer consumed me. They were shadows, and I was walking in sunlight. Irene often joined me at choir rehearsals, and afterward we'd sit in a cafe, sipping tea, watching people bustle past. "See," she would say, "life after the storm can be brighter than before it." She was right. My storm had nearly killed me, but it had also set me free. One evening after choir, Margaret approached me. "We're planning a small concert at the park in a few weeks. Would you consider a solo?" I almost protested, but the words caught in my throat. A solo. Me. A woman who once couldn't even command the attention of her own sons. "Yes," I said finally. My voice trembled, but my spirit did not. I'd be honored. As I walked home that night, the stars glimmered above, and I thought of the storm that had once drenched me, how it had felt like a baptism into a new life. This concert would be my declaration that I had survived, that I had risen, that I was not erased, but reborn. And as dawn broke the next morning, painting the horizon gold, I whispered the words that had become my truth. "This is my sunrise, my second chance. My life at last is mine." The morning of the park concert dawned clear and golden, as if the heavens themselves wanted to celebrate with me. I rose early, the air still cool, and stood by Irene's garden window watching the sunlight pour over the roses and lemon tree. My hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. For weeks, I had rehearsed with the choir, relearning what it meant to use my voice, to let it soar without apology. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I would sing a solo before a crowd. Not in a kitchen, not humming while I sewed or scrubbed floors, but in the open air under the sky with people listening because they wanted to hear me. Irene placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You're glowing, Eleanor," she said. "This is your moment." Her words settled deep within me. Once upon a time, my moment had been tied to my children's achievements, their graduations, their weddings, their parties. But tonight, for the first time, the moment belonged entirely to me. By evening, the park filled with folding chairs and picnic blankets. Families arrived with coolers, children darted between trees, and the scent of fried chicken and lemonade mingled in the breeze. At the front, under strings of twinkling lights, the choir gathered. My heart pounded as I adjusted the sheet music in my hands. Margaret, our choir director, leaned close. "Remember Eleanor," she whispered. "You're not just singing tonight, you're telling your story through every note." When it was time, I stepped forward. The microphone stood waiting, its silver head glinting in the twilight. For a moment, the old Eleanor, the one who had spent decades silencing herself to please others, wanted to shrink back. But then I thought of Grace's mother, of Mrs. Caldwell on the bus, of Irene's endless faith. I thought of the years I had been invisible, and of the moment I walked out into the storm. I lifted my chin. The piano began soft and steady. I opened my mouth, and the first note escaped a little shaky, but true. Then another stronger. Then another clear and ringing. I sang of sorrow, of sacrifice, of nights spent waiting by silent phones. I sang of storms survived, of chains broken, of a soul reborn. The lyrics were not written for me, but they might as well have been carved from my heart. Each word, each rise and fall of melody was a piece of my truth. And then something extraordinary happened. The crowd fell utterly silent. Children stopped running, conversations hushed, and all eyes fixed on me. They weren't looking past me as my sons so often had. They weren't enduring me out of obligation. They were truly deeply listening. By the final note, my tears blurred the world, but my voice held steady, rising like a prayer. Silence, and then applause, thunderous and unrelenting. People stood clapping, cheering, some even weeping. Irene's face shone with pride as she rose to her feet, her hands above her head. Margaret wiped tears from her cheeks. Strangers reached out, touching my arm as I returned to my seat, whispering, "Beautiful, thank you, you touched my heart." In that moment, I felt it, the serenity I had longed for. The affirmation that my life, though scarred and battered, was still a jewel cut by hardship, but shining brighter for every fracture. Later, as the stars spread across the night sky, I walked home with Irene. My heart was calm, my soul quiet, but beneath the peace was a joy so profound it felt holy. "You did it," Irene said softly. "You gave them your voice, and in return, they gave you back yourself." I nodded. For the first time, I feel complete. Not because my children came, they didn't, and perhaps they never will, but because I no longer need their presence to confirm my worth. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the crickets outside, and thought of my journey. From the hospital bed, where my heart faltered, to the storm-soaked escape, to the bus, where I discovered I wasn't alone, to the choir that gave me a new song, I had been resurrected piece by piece. Yes, it was late in life. Yes, it came after wounds too deep to ever fully heal, but still it came. And that made it sacred. To you listening now, perhaps you carry your own silent wounds. Perhaps you too have given everything only to feel invisible. Hear me. Your life is still a jewel. Even in late years, even after storms, it can shine. Don't let anyone convince you that your worth is tied only to what you give them. Your worth is yours, unshakable, radiant. I am 66 years old, and I am finally free. And if freedom came for me, it can come for you. Dear listener, thank you for walking with me through this journey. If Eleanor's story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave me a comment below. Tell me, do you believe it's ever too late to start again? If you'd like to hear more stories of resilience, rebirth, and dignity, Please subscribe. Auntie May, 365 Voice, and I'll see you in the next video.